Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we are going to be talking about Castlevania Bloodlines for the Sega Genesis. I don't always talk about the intros of games, especially the retro ones, but this one was really cool, especially because it's kind of like you're watching a film. It's got the old film roll on the sides, and I really like the graphics. I just really dug what Konami was doing here. It sets up, where this is taking place, when it's taking place, who these two people are. It's really cool. So you're playing as two vampire hunters, and I just want to point out that Eric's sprite doesn't look a goddamn thing like that. He does not have long yellow hair. So that brings us to the first thing in the gameplay. I almost always use Eric because I just really think the spear works a lot better than the whip does. I know that's crazy to say in a Castlevania game, especially an earlier one, where they're almost totally dominated by Belmonts and the whips. Well, I don't really like using the whip in this game. There's nothing wrong with it. I just prefer using the spear because you have a little bit more control over, what direction you're attacking in. If you play with the whip, you can do directional attacks, but you're mostly just kind of locked in a front, like whipping straight in front of you. With the spear, you can get pretty much every direction, and it just kind of works a little bit better for me. So I do want to point out that this is overall a very good game. I think it's probably my second favorite of the 8 and 16-bit games. It's not quite as good as It's not quite as good as Castlevania 4. Getting my series here messed up. But it is a very solid title. I like it more than the NES games just because it feels like you're just in control more. Your characters handle a lot better. You can do a lot more in the games than you could with the NES titles. With the exception of Castlevania 3, that one comes as close to this one as any of the others. The graphics in this are very good, even though I think they kind of fall apart with the backgrounds. They're not always as good as something like Castlevania 4 or Castlevania 3. They're not bad. They do a few kind of like parallax scrolling things, or at least fake it very well. But when you look at the backgrounds in Castlevania 4 and then you compare it to this, they aren't always on par, and oftentimes Bloodlines kind of falls apart a little bit. That being said, it's still very good. You can use the backgrounds to kind of tell what you need to do, and depending on the character that you're using, you will have to take different routes throughout the levels. So, yeah, it's pretty damn good the way that they have it all set up. It does have a few kind of weird things that I don't like that just sort of happen. It's kind of hard for me to really point out, but it does some stuff that I kind of wish it wouldn't do. And what I'm talking about is specifically when you're actually controlling your character. And this is one of those things where I don't know if it was the game, myself, or my controller, but there were times when I felt like I just couldn't pull off what I wanted to pull off. Oftentimes I will blame that on myself, which I probably should have, but it felt a little off in some cases. Overall, from a gameplay standpoint, it's a very solid game. There's not a whole lot that I have to complain about it. There are some times when you'll walk into a room and find out that it's not where you're supposed to go if you're playing as a certain character, and you kind of have to backtrack a little bit. That's not really a huge problem, but if you don't necessarily know what you're doing, in my case, you don't have the manual, you might not know that you're supposed to actually, do something different. Like in this case, you're supposed to use Eric's his jump, and in other cases, you're supposed to use the whip to get around. Now that I've gone over my time a little bit, I just wanted to talk about the timeline for this really quick, because this is the history buff in me going crazy. I wanted to think in this world of Bloodlines that World War I never happened, because it would make more sense if it didn't take place. Because the game takes place in 1917, and I don't think two guys would be able to just traverse Europe during some of the heaviest fighting and have absolutely no problems. And I just find it hard to believe that none of the governments really realized, especially in Germany and France, that this stuff is going on. I figured somebody would be looking into it besides, these two. Especially when the game has you go from Berlin essentially through a whole bunch of trenches, or at least areas where there should be trenches, to get to Versailles. It just didn't make any goddamn sense to me while I was playing this, and I didn't notice it when I first played it, almost 20 years ago. Well, not quite 20 years ago, but pretty close to that, about 20, 25 years ago. I didn't realize that, and then playing it again for this, I'm like, they should not be able to just go through the areas that they're going through. Like, that just does not make any sense to me. It probably doesn't matter to anyone else, and you can most likely skip from about, 5 minutes 28 seconds to about 7 minutes and 28 seconds here, just in case you were wanting to know. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the bosses, because they are great. I really love the bosses in this game. They're all very well detailed. They're pretty unique, and they just look really awesome. Even from the very beginning, where you're going through the ruins of Dracula's castle, and you're fighting that weird dog thing that just showed up, it just makes the game feel different from the NES titles. It's so cool to play weird stuff like this, which they could have pulled off on the Super Nintendo, but they didn't. They put it here on the Genesis, and it looks really cool. I can't really say too much more than that, but it just looks really awesome. Each boss has their own pattern, and once you kind of get it down, you can do a pretty good job of taking them all out. There are some that, I'm not going to lie, are just really annoying. Like, once you get to Atlantis and you have to deal with the stupid water boss, and he's not even a real boss, he's just a mini boss. That one frustrated the hell out of me when I first started playing this. Just because I was not able to do what I needed to do. It's pretty simple, you just, jump and hit him, but you have to do it while he's raising the water in the level. And if you don't do it fast enough, then you can drown, which has happened to me multiple times while I was trying to figure this whole thing out. Once I got the pattern down, he was pretty much just a piece of cake. But it got really annoying as I was suffering through this game trying to figure everything out, especially on the first playthrough. Most of the bosses I didn't have a huge problem with. Really wasn't until I got to the Leaning Tower of Pisa that level just pissed me right off, because I was not able to really do what I wanted to do, and I couldn't quite get his pattern down at first. It just took a little while to figure everything out. Eventually I got through it, but it took a very long time. it's just a very well-made game and a very solid entry in the Castlevania franchise. And it's one that I think needs to, at least it should be talked about a little bit more, because it kind of feels like, well, I'll get more into this in a bit, but it kind of feels like Konami just sort of ignored this title in some ways. Okay, so let's kind of wrap this up, and we'll get into some of my final thoughts on Castlevania Bloodlines. For a while, this was my favorite Castlevania game, just because it was one that felt a little weird. Konami didn't really put out games on the Sega Genesis, so seeing something like this when I was out game hunting was kind of cool. It was the same feeling I got when I saw Contra Hardcore or, what's that name? It's not Shovel Knight, Rocket Knight. When I saw stuff like that, and you just didn't see those games on the Sega Genesis, so finding something like Castlevania Bloodlines and playing it, it was just really cool to me. I had played the first three, and at that point I had never played Castlevania 4 or the PlayStation 1 Symphony of the Night. And at that point, a lot of Castlevania games kind of felt old to me. I wanted like newer titles and that sort of thing. But when I found Castlevania Bloodlines, it kind of like rejuvenated my interest in the franchise. And I went back and I played a lot of the NES games, and then I played Super Castlevania, and that one was amazing too. And slowly I got into like the Metroidvania versions of Castlevania, or Castloid, whichever one you want. And those kind of turned into some of my favorite Castlevania games. But I'll always have a soft spot for this one, for Castlevania Bloodlines, because I think it looks really good. If I was going to pick one, well, if I was going to pick like a top 5, this would definitely be up there. It would probably be 3, with Castlevania 4 being above it just a little bit, and then Symphony of the Night being on top, just because I think Symphony of the Night is a very, very good game, and it's one that you can always come back to. So anyway, guys, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and have a great day, everybody. Bye.